Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today in our workshop number 3 in a 5-part series, applying an equity lens to EV and e-mobility strategies. I'm Desi from Clean Air Partnership, and I'll be your host today. Clean Air Partnership is a Toronto-based organization, and we acknowledge that the land on which we operate is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. At Clean Air Partnership, we recognize that Indigenous peoples are particularly vulnerable to climate change and will be disproportionately impacted by its effects. Through our work, we are committed to disrupting ongoing approaches to climate governance that reproduce settler colonial relations and systematically exclude Indigenous peoples from policymaking. Just a few days before the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, we want to remind ourselves and you to listen, learn, and reflect on the role that colonization has played in creating divisions and inequality between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. September 30th honors the children who never returned home and the survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and communities. Commemorating the truth of this tragic and painful history is a vital component of reconciliation and a starting point to support people hurt by this history to heal. As part of our acknowledgement, we play short videos in our effort to continue learning. The videos are for and from Indigenous peoples.
We need to decolonize the way we interpret Indigenous methods. Here's what I mean.
You're not practicing being Indigenous unless you're fishing from a canoe and hunting with a bow and arrow.
Ever since the beginning of colonization, the Western world has kept Indigenous cultures locked away in the past in a box, where if we don't portray as your classic Western Indian style like in the movies, we're somehow not practicing being Indigenous. Or Indigenous art somehow isn't Indigenous art if it's not all beads and dream catchers. The truth is, we've never existed the same way for the tens of thousands of years that we've lived here. Like the other nations of the world, we adapt, adopt, and evolve our methods and practices to suit us for the time that we're living in. We have engineers, doctors, craft people, politicians, farmers, you name it, all with practices that at the end of every day will always be Indigenous. We're not always going to be the Indian you had in mind. Miigwech for listening.
So today's workshop will go as follows, very briefly on the first 2 points and then jumping on to the topic. We have a couple examples, but a big part of what we envision is to focus on the crowdsourcing via Menti, and I did send to you yesterday the questions that we're going to be asking you. We also internally brainstorm, so we don't have, so we have a start point where to find the discussion. I put it as a separate point here as a free dialogue, sharing experiences, feelings, thoughts, and ideas, but it doesn't need to be in the last order. It could be at any time. As much as this is a kind of like a learning process and like sharing, we want to have a space also where we can just share outside of work even if needed. So what is equity? Climate equity means addressing the unequal burdens made worse by climate change while ensuring that all people share the benefits of climate protection. The climate crisis is a justice crisis, and we want to emphasize that those who experience systematic and economic barriers are the least equipped to respond to climate opportunities and least resilient to climate impacts. Some of the core benefits of applying climate change efforts through an equity lens is improved livelihoods for equity deserving communities, healthier, safer, and more accessible communities for all, addressing historical oppression and advancing anti-racism and reconciliation, building stronger public support for climate actions. This is just a reminder that we have this resource hub and we are updating it after each workshop we have. I will share a link shortly in the chat. And something very important I want to point out from upfront is that we are not experts on equity and climate, but we're trying to facilitate the collective learning and application of learnings across the Clean Air Council network. And let me share. in case you don't know where to find it. So the next part of the presentation focuses on the topic, electric vehicle and e-mobility strategies. These strategies are just a component of transportation plans. Equitable transportation goes beyond single occupancy vehicles to the entire mobility landscape of a community. Micromobility, public and mass transport, and active mobility must all be considered. In fact, electric vehicles are not tools for increasing equity. The way to build more equitable transportation system is through investments in public transit, e-mobility, and active transportation. Inherently, electric vehicles harm equity because car dependency as a system is inequitable and unjust, since there are a wide variety of people who are unable to drive. Some are youth, disabled people, or older generations. But e-mobility and in-transit provide opportunity to increase equity. And while we are looking at these two strategies together for the purpose of this webinar, we want to be clear upfront that those are entirely different modes of transport, which require different benefits, different strategies and policies. I also want to remind you, or if you missed that, that one of our previous workshops was on equity and active transportation, and I'll share a link on that as well shortly in the chat. So EV adoption thus far, generally, and we all know about that, is that most early electric vehicles have been driven and bought by relatively affluent households. Many of the EV models are luxury vehicles. Incentives have often been given to higher income buyers, and EV charging infrastructure is not equitably dispersed. From a municipal perspective, many municipalities took a role in EV adoption to support residents and businesses transitioning to electric mobility. And the particular role, I guess the most important role among this is for municipalities to provide public charging, especially for those without access to at-home charging, and ensure that new buildings are EV ready so that reduce future cost for retrofitting. It is worth mentioning that the intention of giving incentives and municipalities developing EV strategies is to support the communities in EV adoption, was to open the market so that the price would drop so it's more accessible for everyone, which is slowly happening, and with more efforts on equitable programs, we can be better in supporting those needs. Some economic equity implications of electric vehicles. These are data and research from the States, but it's very equivalent in the Canadian context. Low-income households that do own cars often must spend larger proportions of their income on vehicle-related expenses. And as EV technology improves, it holds the potential to reduce transportation costs relative to household income, especially for low-income households. Again, better scenario will be to have a more equitable way of transportation is to have a e-transit system, for example. But it does provide, EVs can provide opportunities for lower income households. Health implications of electric vehicles. This is more local study. Environmental Defense, University of Toronto, and Ontario Public Health Association did the research in 2020 to model different scenarios for cleaner vehicles in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. And the study estimated that if 100% of cars and SUVs are electric, this will lead to billions of dollars in social benefits. I want to point out that while electric vehicles improve the air quality, they're worsening some of the inequalities, such as road safety. The most, and I probably am repeating it on every slide, but I guess you see where is my point in regards to EV and e-mobility, but the most affordable, healthier, equitable transportation options are expanded public transit service and more safe streets for more people to walk, bike and roll. This report from Stokes Consulting, which is a Hamilton-based organization, provides the states of e-bikes in Canada and emphasized that equity-deserving groups like women are positively impacted by e-bikes. Other e-mobility pilot projects that are happening in Canada, across Canada and the States, are in e-scooters and e-bike sharing, e-car sharing, and e-shuttles. So some examples of successful actions. This is example from Denver's neighborhood-based approach to equitable e-mobility. City of Denver put equity as a foundation to the planning process of its EV action plan. The equity index compares equity outcomes across neighborhoods through several equity metrics seen on the screen. Montebello was selected as the community of focus because of its low neighborhood equity index score, lower income neighborhood that has a limited number of reliable, safe, and affordable transportation options, as well as limited access to education and public health resources. The project team that worked, the city staff, took an on-guided tour of the pedestrian experience walking around Montebello as part of the community assessment needs. The city partnered with Guidehouse to design stakeholder engagement centering on community voices and social equity. They prioritized human-centered design approach to public engagement, where they treated community members as partners and co-owners of the program, which set a proper groundwork to develop e-mobility pilot recommendations specific to the Montebello community. They come up with 6 pilot project ideas. On the screen, we see one of them on e-scooters and e-bikes. City staff further developed a pilot prioritization criteria to help ensure project opportunities align with community goals using the 2-level approach. The first level is must-have, which respond to the question, does a pilot project meet basic community requirements? And the second level approach is community needs and impacts, which respond to the question, how is a pilot project positioned to address a variety of community needs? This activity also helped to identify potential partners. We are yet to see this project rolling out and the outcomes of it. But in addition to the project, the City of Denver has a standard e-bike rebate open to anyone, and then a larger rebate based on income qualifications. The other 2 examples are from Quebec, and they're similar, where municipal-owned vehicles are used by the public. While the workshop is on EV strategies, which are strategy more for private-owned vehicles and e-mobility strategies, this example is more on electric fleet adoption for public transit and municipal fleets, but does support undeserved communities via the use of electric vehicles. That's why we feature it here. So the first one is the TCT Mobility Project, or the Regine project as well. A group of municipalities in the Gaspésie de la Madeleine region, together with transit organization Regine, purchased 10 EVs and charging and a mobility as a service digital tool to support the coordination of reservations. Between June 2021 and March 2022, 175 users made a total of 300 reservations. These users were both internal employees and elected officials and external community members. And municipalities in interviews that we did through another project mentioned that they do confirm that they lowered municipal and community greenhouse gas emissions and expenses from fuel consumption and maintenance compared to their internal combustion vehicle. And this is yet to be seen more as the project goes. The second project is very similar, the Savoia project, 10 municipalities with 10 electric vehicles into their fleets and 17 EV chargers to connect the region and be used by the communities undeserved by public transit and taxis. The project is delayed, and they were supposed to receive the vehicles in 2021, but it was delayed, so we are yet to see what will be the outcomes of this project. That was the kind of like the introduction, the background, and what we found. I will kind of like stop now a little bit and see If any of you want to jump in and share something before we go to the crowdsourcing via Menti. And also, if you are familiar of any projects, please either put them in the chat or you can just speak up. So I'll just be quiet for a few seconds to see if anyone wants to jump in and say something. Yes, we are recording and the slides will be shared with everyone that registered. I'm sending you the Menti link and we're going to move to there. But if you want to jump in at any point and speak, please feel free. Here, I'll share my screen. Just give me a second. Okay. You should be seeing the Menti, and if you can follow the link that I sent in the chat, or if you can go on your device on menti.com and then use the code 1929017. This will allow you to contribute here to the questions by typing, but by all means, feel free to also jump in and speak up. So I did send this information to you, but and I mentioned that as much as we want to hear from you, we also were brainstorming internally and trying to put ourselves in your shoes and think about how to answer these questions. The first one that we are asking is, what are you trying to achieve with this action, which is I guess for the purpose of this workshop, we put this together for the electric vehicle strategies, what you're trying to achieve with this having an electric vehicle strategies, and also what you're trying to achieve with having an e-mobility strategy. I mentioned it earlier, it's not the best way to collect the information, but actually for the purpose of this workshop, it works well. After that, I will be separate the responses because in the hub that we have, they're in a different sections. So don't worry, just throw everything that you have in mind here, and then I will be separating it after. At this point, I want to hear kind of someone just to hint me that you hear me, you see the slides, and you can access Menti, so I know that I'm on the right track here.
Yes, we can access the Menti and we can see your screen. Thank you,
Aisha, so much. Okay. I will be continuing bubbling while, thank you, Mara, for the reaction. While probably you're texting, hopefully you're texting to Menti. But what we come up with is we were thinking that the reasons for the strategies is improving equitable access to light-duty electric vehicles and e-mobility in equity-seeking deserving groups and low and moderate income communities. Thank you. Lower the financial barrier to install personal EV chargers, lower financial barriers to own an electric vehicles, even though I don't know how much role a municipality have in the owning part of electric vehicles. And I know that from previous conversation with some of you, I know that a lot of municipalities, and we presented City of Toronto outreach effort. I know that Barrie is also doing an outreach effort just to for conduct outreach and education to reach equity-seeking deserving groups and ally communities. And I guess generally the communities within your jurisdiction. and prioritize access to charging infrastructure. And here we're putting together, it doesn't need to be in one place, probably doesn't make sense even, or if it's on street parking, we see examples in Europe where electric vehicle charging is for both e-mobility devices and EV, but yes, I don't know, I'm not sure I've seen Canadian examples of that. Explore opportunities to increase adoption of e-micromobility options as a more equitable, lower barrier of transportation. Yeah, that's e-micromobility. There are some, I guess they're not electric buses, but some smaller municipalities are becoming more creative in using shuttles that are on demand. If they're e-shuttles, that's even better. But I will stop just for a second and see if someone else wants to jump and speak.
I'm wondering, does this scope, and I'm sorry if I missed this, I joined a bit late. Does this scope include e-transit as well, or are you sort of more focused on private vehicle ownership?
I think, well, it is kind of a conversion. It's more on the e-mobility, which in our case, we were thinking more on e-scooters and e-bikes, but out and I guess e-shuttles. I would think that it's different than e-transit, but maybe you like what makes sense from a municipal staff perspective?
Like I'm not municipal staff, but
okay.
But I'm very passionate about the space, and I've always sort of felt that e-transit is kind of a more responsible investment from governments of all levels. And yeah, and I just wanted to kind of anchor my thinking, is today's discussion also extending to e-transit, or kind of more focused on EVs and the personal vehicles?
Yeah, that's where my personal desire wants to be, but at the same time, we know that so most of our folks on the call are municipal staff, and we're touring towards this audience so that we can think about when the time is to create this strategies, like how to think about an equitable perspective. And while, and I mentioned it earlier in the presentation, we do believe and we want to see this happening, that the e-transit and public transportation and e-mobility and walking and cycling, it's getting a priority. We know because of funding opportunities that municipalities are rolling their EV strategies. So we wanted to also talk about that, even though they are not the most equitable programs and programs in place, because they support personal vehicles, like how we can think about it so that when they're there, they capture when they're developed, they capture equity questions within.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarity.
Yes. Adopting EV publicly will impact residents' perspective in the long term too. Right. Equitable access to EV is the only way of a success of EV. Low-income groups are also the ones who cannot afford fuel-efficient cars too. Absolutely. We'll move to the next question, and I hope I'm not going to cut someone that it's in the moment of responding here. It's going to go to the next one, but that's okay. So the other question was, who has traditionally participated and benefited from this action, which we all know that it's predominantly white, middle, high-income communities, households that have access to charging at home. Probably we're missing someone, but I don't think that the focus should be so much on this question. It's more to like prompt us thinking when we're responding to the next ones, because yeah, we kind of like know who traditionally benefited and where the focus needs to be, which is in what groups are most in need of this action. And again, we're asking for both electric vehicles and e-mobility strategies, and even for like e-transit. I think the group will be similar. What we come up with is vulnerable communities, especially those vulnerable to air pollution and experiencing car ownership as a serious financial burden. Suburban youth, and here we don't talk about EV, it's for e-mobility and e-transit, because especially those who are like we capture it in the other message, which is communities with poor public transportation options and harder to access arterial roads. But that's youth is either like working or studying in different areas, and this last mile it's very um, um, yeah, it's very important for them, and it's not what I try to capture here is like poor public transportation options, because sometimes there may be transportation options, but they're not reliable, and that makes the whole journey from A to B very, very difficult. Residents living in suburbs who do not have access to cars, yes. Vulnerable communities, especially those vulnerable to air pollution and experiencing car ownership as a serious financial burden. I think we are on the same page here, and we kind of like, yeah, we know who we need to target. So I guess the next questions will be more like digging into how. But I will be quiet a little bit for 1 minute here and see if someone wants to jump in, or be quiet while you're typing, because sometimes it could be annoying someone talking while you're trying to concentrate and write. I will move to the next question, because as we're going, they're becoming more focused. What has prevented these groups from participating in the past? What we come up with is upfront capital costs, obviously, lack of dedicated safe space for e-mobility and active transportation. This is where I want to see more, and because we already, I don't know in your communities, but here in Toronto we already see all this e-scooters and deliveries especially, but there is no always dedicated safe space, because it's shared with bike lanes, and also they're not everywhere bike lanes. So sometimes the other day I saw it on the Don Valley. There was a e-scooter on the Don Valley highway, and it looked scary. So I think it is when municipalities looking forward needs to provide this spaces. Lack of charging options and range anxiety. That is range and access anxiety. So range is more, I guess, they're similar, but in this context, it wouldn't mean of when long distance, but it's more for people that don't have an option at home to charge. Then they rely on public charging, and um, uh, and currently if there's no public charging, then they're using the retails or chargers, and they're much more expensive. So there is a equity implications there as well. Health and safety concerns of the residents are one of the biggest concerns. I absolutely agree. Thank you for providing this input. Lack of experience in safety concerns with e-mobility devices. Yes, this is still new. There is a concerns about like how fast the e-bike or e-scooter is going, and that's why I think we need to designate, the municipality needs to need to think about like different spaces, how to combine the walking and rolling in a way that it's safe. Moving on to the next question. What actions can address barriers for those most in need? So bear with me here, I'll be reading what we came up with. Of course, first and most important is identifying those most in need in your community. So identifying equity-seeking and deserving groups. Identifying also within these groups, within the communities there, map out neighborhoods with 3 to 5 kilometers distance from good public transit routes. So these are the routes that will be prioritized for e-mobility or e-shuttles, depending on what the strategy for the municipality will be, so that it can close the last mile. Prioritize the installation of public EV charging station in neighborhoods with multi-family residents, where residents may not have access to home charging. And I know we've discussed in previous workshops on EV that that's kind of like what was the expression, egg and chicken, because families that live in multi-family residence are not buying electric vehicles because they're worried of where the charge to be, but then municipalities, in order to put in place EVs, they also want to see EV cars in this region, in this neighborhoods. So there's a little bit of chicken and egg there. Implement electric car sharing programs in diverse neighborhoods, especially those with limited access to personal vehicles. And I know that the examples from Quebec are small municipalities, remote, and that's why 10 municipalities combined, but probably there could be possibilities for a program within the municipality where car sharing electric vehicle cars are available for certain hours, and then they need to be returned back to the parking lot. And then, there are pilot projects of municipalities in US which are piloting such programs. Prioritize human-centered design approach to public engagement. I think that's I probably will talk about this later as well, but I was just on Tuesday, there was a Livable Forum Communities, and I was very fortunate to be part of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Fishbowl. And I think from the 2 hours, the discussion that happened, which is brilliant, the people that participated, I think the one takeout is go to the community. And I know some of you, I think, Aisha, maybe you can talk about this, that you're already, some of the municipalities are already doing this, are engaging with the community when developing programs. But that's make space and place and realize why these communities are more difficult to reach out, and then because they're working harder, they don't have free time. So then the municipal staff need to adjust, like these programs need to be adjusted so that make it easier for those people that are equity seeking and deserving groups, and low and medium economic communities to be able to participate. Ensure electric public transit options, e-buses, e-trams serve marginalized communities and improve overall transit access. Allow and encourage the conversion of existing parking spaces in malls, theaters, and community centers into EV charging hubs. I will stop a little bit before I continue reading to see if someone wants to jump. And it doesn't need to be answering this question. It could be something, whatever comes in your mind about equity, I mean, in your work or your life. Okay, I will continue to the next question. What are the negative equity implications to keep in mind when developing the strategies? Are there any measures that can help to prevent that harm proactively? And I can be honest that I think we were good in identifying the negative equity implications, but not that good of the measures and the harm. The second part of the question. So if you have some insights, please do provide them. So what are the negative equity implications? Disability groups are raising the issue of hearing electric vehicles and e-mobility and their struggle. So probably, I think not probably, but it is good to hear their point of view and meet somewhere to listen and to understand their point of view. Our municipality is converting parking lots to electric vehicle charging station, the best use of that land for an equity and climate mitigation point of view. I think I don't know if it's that clear, but I guess what we meant here is, when converting parking lots to EV charging station, is that the best use of land? Is the best land use? Maybe it's clear enough. Tire friction from EVs releases even more particulate matter and microplastic pollution than equivalent standard cars, which already has a disproportionate impact on lower income communities and BIPOC. The one big and negative implication is that it's so strange to incentivize the use of personal vehicles and like tax money to go for that. But as we know, that's not that much a municipal work. Expanses of asphalt and concrete roads and parking lots also increase stormwater runoff and flooding and use of a lot of land. That's true. Many people cannot drive due to age or disability. Okay, so I will stop here and see if someone else have something to contribute. Well, I hope that speaks to the fact that we were very good in our brainstorming, and it's just we captured everything and there's nothing else to be added, which I doubt. But I also can hear or understand you if you just wanted to listen and not contribute today that much. Moving on to the next question then. Who hasn't yet been engaged that would be good to engage? Why would they be good to engage? And what may limit their engagement, interest, and ability? we already talked about the disabled communities. Also, I spoke about like how one of the major users right now of e-mobility, it's not a shared e-mobility, but e-scooters are food delivery workers. Definitely an important component um, uh, uh, of the community that needs to be involved in these conversations. Larger fleets within jurisdiction, so that could be a larger companies and private companies that are part of the jurisdiction that hopefully are also looking to electrify their fleets. Uber, Lyft, and taxis. And yeah, that's what we came up with. And this was here, I can be honest, I think it was just before the summer, we did a webinar with City of Toronto and their EV strategy and e-mobility strategy. No, I think it was only EV strategy. And they already engaged with this community. So that's why it wasn't easy for us to identify them. But it may be some other players that are very specific for your jurisdiction. And then here it's also, and then of course the like how to, here it comes back to how to reach out. Most of the challenges are reaching out to these equity-seeking communities. Something that actually yesterday or on Tuesday, what I was mentioning, there was like this municipal staff from Hamilton. This program existed. Now it's not anymore running, but actually when he shared it, everyone was like, why is this not existing? But they gave money for certain community members, and then they actually educate them and facilitation. They provided training for facilitation, and then slowly establish a very good relationship. Also supported they have a physical space for the community in different neighborhoods. I believe there were 3 different areas in the city, and while this took like a few years to establish this good relationship, then when the city was I forgot what he mentioned now, one of the plans that they were developing, the emergency response plan. They actually, instead of inviting, which is a traditional way, having a public hearing within the city hall, which has a limitation by itself of not everyone is feeling safe to come in the city hall and speak up. It's not the most intuitive place to go, and it's a bit intimidating. So instead, city staff went and presented to this already established community center with relationship of people that they already were there, have established, and they presented their emergency response plan, and then the community actually stood up and they had the equal. There was no this like power game. When you go to City Hall, you may be intimidated, so you'll not speak up. Even if you go, probably you'll not go if you feel that way. But if the city staff came to you, then you feel okay in your neighborhood and your space, and then you have a better, you're empowered to speak up. So then, based on these conversations, the city was able to make changes and accommodate what was more realistic based on the community. I'm sharing this because it was one of the great examples that was shared. And I would love to hear if you have any of these examples. Similarly, which this example made me think that recently we talked with BC Hydro, and they're having this program where they, instead of giving incentives or money, they actually train people. In their case, was for energy managers, but they train energy managers, and then they share this energy managers among smaller municipalities in the region. That's also something that it's different here, but it kind of like captures the equity part, or the part that we need to think, or like the governance structure, the way that it's structured now. It's municipalities are doing stuff, and there is this process of community engagement. They usually allow for people to come, as I mentioned, to cities, but that's, by this point, we already know that it's not capturing exactly those communities that are in need. So you need the players that are on the ground and engage if there's already existing groups, or just just develop the program so that it truly engage the community by going there and being like, in person, meeting them. I'm bubbling a lot today, but here I'm going to move to the other question. And this, we don't have an answer, so it is up to you, and I'll be happy to hear what actions item has given you a clear sense of what levers are available for you to advance equity in EV and e-mobility strategies. And please feel free to speak up as well, or use the chat if you're not into Menti. Or be honest if the session was not at all what you were expecting, and you did not took any of this to help you for EV and e-mobility strategies. That's also a good feedback so that we can improve on our side. Otherwise, that is the last question, and I don't have anything else prepared. And I can stop sharing and stop recording so that if someone feels more